It's a tough pill to swallow, but sometimes the hardest truth is the one we least want to admit. If you find yourself tangled in the web of toxic people, it's not entirely their fault. It's yours for giving them the space, the time, and the emotional keys to your inner world. That might sound brutal at first, but what if I told you the power to change everything has been in your hands all along? The power to set boundaries, to reclaim your energy, and to walk away without guilt. You don't need their permission. You just need clarity. And that clarity starts with understanding how toxic people operate, and more importantly, how you've unknowingly let them operate unchecked. Toxic people don't crash into your life like meteors. They slip in, unnoticed, often disguised as friends, family, co-workers. They find the cracks in your boundaries, the vulnerabilities you haven't yet recognized in yourself, and they nest there, feeding off the emotional reactions you don't even realize you're giving them. That's their power source. The emotional rise, the defensive response, the need to explain yourself, they feed on that. And most of the time, people let them. Not because they're weak, but because confronting the truth is uncomfortable. And more than that, because we've been taught that being kind means being open. But being open without boundaries, that's not kindness. That's exposure. There was a time in my life when I believed that forgiveness meant weakness. That to forgive was to welcome someone back into your life, arms open, guard down. But I was wrong. Forgiveness is not about saying what they did was okay. It's not about pretending it didn't hurt. Forgiveness is about setting yourself free. There was someone in my past. Let's call them Alex. We were close, or so I thought. I confided in Alex about something deeply personal, something I had never told anyone. And in a matter of days, I learned that Alex had not only shared it, but twisted it, turning a truth into a weapon, used against me behind my back. The pain of that betrayal sat in my chest like a weight. I was angry. I was hurt. And most of all, I was furious with myself for trusting them. The resentment didn't fade with time. It clung to me, whispering every time I heard their name, every time I walked past them. It wasn't until one particularly low night, scrolling through thoughts and quotes, that a line hit me like a punch. Resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. I had read it before, but that night it landed differently. I realized Alex had long moved on. They were living their life, untouched by the anger I carried every day. The pain wasn't punishing them, it was punishing me. So I did something I never thought I could. I forgave, but not in the way people usually think. I didn't call Alex. I didn't confront them or try to make peace. I forgave them silently in my heart. I let go of the bitterness, not for their sake, but for mine. And even more importantly, I didn't forget. I didn't erase the lesson. That betrayal taught me something invaluable about trust. Who earns it, who doesn't. Forgiveness set me free, but remembering ensured I never walked into the same trap again. You see, we often confuse forgiveness with weakness, but forgiveness is strength in its purest form. It takes far more courage to release your anger than to cling to it. It takes wisdom to say, I see what you did. I'm not holding on to it anymore, but I'm not forgetting it either. Forgiveness is like tending a wound. You stop picking at it, you let it heal. But you don't pretend the scar never existed. You don't ignore the lesson written into your skin. Think about that for a moment. What if forgiveness wasn't about the other person at all? What if it was about taking the emotional knife out of your own back, patching yourself up, and walking forward stronger, smarter, and sharper? That's what true healing looks like. Not forgetting, but learning. The Stoics believed in mastering your emotions, and this is where that mastery begins. With the simple, powerful decision to stop letting someone else's actions dictate your peace. That's what forgiveness really is. Not a second chance for them, a first chance for you to reclaim yourself. And sometimes reclaiming yourself means limiting access. Here's something most people won't say out loud. Not everyone deserves to be in your life. I don't care if they're your oldest friend, your sibling, your coworker, or even your parent. If someone consistently drains you, disrespects your space, or ignores your boundaries, it's time to put a wall up. Not out of hatred, out of survival. I used to be the kind of person who said yes to everything. If someone needed time, energy, a listening ear, I gave it. No questions asked. I thought that made me a good person, but what it really did was turn me into an emotional dumping ground. I remember this one friend who would call me just to vent for hours. Every single call was the same. Complaints, drama, a revolving door of the same problems, never changing. And I listened. I gave advice. I stayed up late. Until one day, after yet another exhausting call, I hung up and just sat there thinking, what am I even getting out of this? That was my wake-up call. I realized I had been giving VIP access to someone who wasn't even willing to pay the cover charge of mutual respect. So I started creating distance. I didn't announce it. I didn't make it dramatic. I just began answering a little slower, ending conversations a little sooner, changing the subject when things turned toxic. The energy vampires, they started fading on their own. You'd be surprised how quickly toxic people disappear when you stop feeding them. There's power in knowing not everyone deserves backstage access to your life. Start thinking of your time and energy like currency. If someone keeps spending yours without offering anything in return, they don't get the privilege of your presence. It's not cruel, it's clarity. There's nothing wrong with reserving the best of yourself for the people who actually value it. This doesn't always mean cutting people off completely. Sometimes it means subtle boundaries. Responding with, "That sounds tough. What do you think you'll do about it?" instead of diving headfirst into their chaos. It's gently stepping back from conversations that you know will go nowhere. It's choosing silence over engagement when all they want is to stir drama. And yes, some people will call you distant, cold, or selfish. Let them, because your peace isn't up for debate. So protect your space, not just from toxic people, but from the temptation to play their games. And nothing throws a wrench into a toxic person's plan like humor. Humor is your secret weapon. When they come in swinging with snide remarks or passive-aggressive comments, disarm them with laughter. It doesn't have to be mean, just clever enough to take the sting out of their words and leave them deflated. I'll never forget a coworker who lived for criticism. No one could do anything right. One day they looked at my desk and, in front of others, snarked, "Wow, it looks like a tornado hit your space." I smiled, shrugged, and said, "Absolutely. I like to keep the chaos external so I can stay calm inside." People laughed. The coworker didn't have a comeback. They didn't comment on my desk again. That's the power of humor. It flips the dynamic. It shows them you're not rattled, that they can't shake you. And when they can't shake you, they can't control you. The key is to keep it light. Don't sink to their level. Don't let your joke become a jab. Just enough wit to signal, "I see what you're doing, and it's not going to work." That's your first step back into your own power. And that power has always been yours. You just have to stop giving it away. There's something transformative that happens the moment you stop apologizing for your peace. When you draw a line in the sand and finally say, "I've had enough," a quiet power starts to awaken in you. One that was always there but got buried under years of people-pleasing, over-explaining, and being everything for everyone else. That power comes roaring back when you make the choice to limit who gets to walk through your doors. And this right here is where your real freedom begins. See, not everyone deserves a front row seat to your life. I don't care how long they've known you. I don't care if they're blood. I don't care if the world says you're supposed to keep them close. Some people are simply bad for your soul. And not because they're evil or inherently broken, but because they're chaos wearing the mask of connection. The moment you stop handing out unlimited access passes to your time, your thoughts, your emotional bandwidth, you begin to realize just how sacred those things are. I used to be so afraid of hurting feelings that I kept my own hurt tucked away in silence. I thought that by being endlessly available, I was being kind. But kindness without boundaries is how you end up resentful, exhausted, and lost in a life where you're constantly adjusting your own comfort to make room for everyone else's discomfort. It hit me one day, right after another draining conversation with someone who always made their problems my responsibility. I hung up the phone, stared at the ceiling, and asked myself a question that changed everything. Why am I letting this person take so much from me? That question didn't come from a place of anger. It came from clarity, the kind that arrives not with fireworks, but with the slow and steady realization that you've been saying yes to the wrong people for far too long. So I started doing something radical. I started saying no, not out loud, not with drama, not with declarations, quietly, firmly, consistently. I limited access. I stopped picking up every call. I stopped justifying my boundaries. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided they weren't going to understand me. And do you know what happened? Some people vanished. They faded like background noise when you turn down the volume, because that's all they ever were, noise. And the ones who stayed, they adjusted. They respected the shift. They learned to approach me with the same energy they wanted in return. You get to decide who has a seat at your table. You get to decide who you pour into. You get to decide when someone's presence is costing you more than it's worth. You don't need permission to protect your peace. You just need conviction. That's not cruelty, that's wisdom. And sometimes the sharpest way to handle toxic behavior isn't a confrontation, it's a punchline. Toxic people thrive on friction. They want a reaction, they want the show. But when you meet their chaos with humor, with levity, with a calm that makes them look ridiculous instead of you, the entire script flips. There was a time a colleague made a jab at me in a meeting, something smug and performative, like they were putting on a show for others. A younger version of me might have gotten defensive, might have tried to prove myself, but instead I smiled and said, "I'm honored you've made me the main character in your story today." The room went quiet, not in awkwardness, but in realization. Because when you stay grounded in who you are, no one can shake your center. Humor does that. It gives you the upper hand without you having to raise your voice. But don't confuse that calm with passivity. Knowing when to disengage is an art form all on its own. Sometimes walking away is the loudest statement you'll ever make, not because you gave up, but because you finally decided to choose yourself. And choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. I had a friend once, someone who was always the life of the party. Everyone loved them. They were magnetic, charming, the kind of person who walked into a room and made it brighter. But behind closed doors, they were draining. Every conversation revolved around them. Every emotion was theirs to unload. And if I ever, even once, needed to talk about something personal, the conversation would shift back to them. At first, I thought I was being too sensitive, that maybe I just needed to be more understanding. But over time, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. The final straw came when I was going through a tough time, and I called them, not to vent, not to unload, but just to ask for a little support. They answered the phone, and after I shared what I was dealing with, they said, "Yeah, that sucks. Anyway, I've had a rough day too." And then launched into their usual monologue. I hung up feeling worse than I did before the call. And in that moment, I realized I was giving emotional gold to someone who couldn't even spare a second glance. So I walked away. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because the truth is, walking away from people who can't or won't show up for you doesn't make you cold. It makes you conscious. It means you've stopped hoping there'll be someone they've already shown you they're not. And that's one of the most powerful choices you can make. Not every goodbye has to be loud. Sometimes the most life-changing goodbyes are the ones whispered silently in your own mind. The ones where you say, "I deserve more," and then act like it. And when you create that space, something beautiful begins to happen. You start attracting people who match the energy you've been giving. People who don't compete with your light, but reflect it back to you. People who celebrate your wins, show up for your lows, and make you feel seen, not used. You felt it before, haven't you? That moment you meet someone who just gets it, someone who listens, not to respond, but to understand. Someone who doesn't drain you, but adds something to your life without taking from it. Those people exist, and they are the antidote to every toxic connection you've ever endured. But they can only come in once you make room, once you've cleared the clutter, once you've stopped trying to fix what was never yours to repair in the first place. So here's the truth. You're not here to carry people who refuse to walk on their own. You're not here to be everyone's therapist, savior, punching bag, or safety net. You're here to grow, to thrive, to become the most grounded, radiant, and aligned version of yourself. And that version of you, they don't chase validation. They don't beg for loyalty. They don't explain their boundaries to people who keep breaking them. They choose peace, not occasionally, but daily. And that peace becomes the standard for everything. How you move, how you speak, who you allow in. When you value yourself enough to walk away from what drains you, you create a life that doesn't need to be escaped from. And the beauty is, it all starts with one decision. The decision to stop participating in your own depletion. To start protecting your energy like your life depends on it, because it does. To let the phone ring. To say no without guilt. To close the door gently but permanently. And then to open new ones. Ones that lead to more joy, more stillness, more connection. You're not too much. You've just been giving too much to the wrong people. Now it's time to give it back, to yourself. There comes a moment, often quiet and almost unnoticeable, when you stop waiting for someone to change and instead start changing your expectations. Not from a place of bitterness, but from the deep, undeniable realization that you've been living in a cycle that only spins because you keep pushing it forward. That moment feels like freedom, not the kind that explodes in fireworks, but the kind that slips in like sunrise after the longest night. It's in that clarity you realize you've been trying to convince someone to care, to understand, to grow, when really the only person you ever needed to convince was yourself. Convince yourself that it's okay to stop, that it's okay to let go, that it's okay to walk away from people who only show up when it benefits them. Walking away isn't always a declaration. It's not always slammed doors or screaming matches. Sometimes, walking away looks like silence. It looks like choosing not to answer the phone. It looks like deleting the message before it gets a reply. It looks like letting their opinions pass through you like wind instead of letting them settle in your bones. It's a soft rebellion, a quiet revolution, but it's powerful, and it changes everything. You see, toxic people rarely walk into your life like villains. They don't always show up wearing labels. Often they arrive as friends, lovers, even family, and that's what makes it so complicated. Because for a long time, you make excuses for them. You tell yourself they're going through a rough patch, that it's not personal, that if you just love them enough, if you're patient enough, they'll finally be what you need. But they won't, not because they can't, but because they don't want to. And maybe that's the hardest truth to accept, that someone could know your heart, see your effort, understand your value, and still choose to take instead of give. I had a person in my life like that, charismatic, lively, the kind of presence that lit up every room. But behind the charisma was a weight, a constant drain. Conversations weren't conversations. They were emotional performances. Every phone call left me feeling more tired than before. Every message carried a subtle demand. Every gathering turned into a spotlight for their problems. And when the roles reversed, when I needed something, even just a listening ear, there was silence, excuses, deflection, or worse, comparison. You think that's bad? Let me tell you about what I'm dealing with. There was no space for me in that connection. I was the supporting role in their story, never the main character in mine. And yet I stayed longer than I should have because I thought that's what loyalty looked like. But loyalty without reciprocation isn't noble. It's a slow erosion of your spirit. And the moment I realized that, I made a different choice. I stopped waiting for them to see me. I started seeing myself. That's what walking away is. It's not about giving up on people. It's about refusing to give up on yourself. And here's the twist no one tells you. When you walk away from what drains you, you don't just get distance. You get clarity. You begin to hear your own thoughts again. You begin to remember what peace feels like. You realize how loud the chaos had become and how quietly it had settled into every corner of your life. That realization is devastating and liberating at the same time, because now you can never unknow it. And from that moment forward, you see things differently. You see people differently. You no longer chase understanding where there's none to be found. You no longer beg for respect from people who treat it like currency they never plan to spend. You shift. And when you shift, your standards change. You stop engaging in conversations that go nowhere. You stop explaining yourself to people who've already decided to misunderstand you. You stop allowing people to rent space in your life just because they once held the title of friend or lover or family. And you start building something better. A life filled with relationships that don't feel like negotiations, where your value isn't measured by what you can do for someone else, where love feels like peace, not performance, where conversations leave you lighter, not heavier. But it takes courage to get there. It takes more strength to walk away than it does to stay and fight a battle that's been rigged from the start. Toxic people aren't looking to resolve anything. They're looking to maintain control. And the moment you stop playing the game, the entire structure collapses. But you have to be willing to be called the bad guy. You have to be okay with people misunderstanding your silence, your distance, your boundaries. Because toxic people will always play the victim when you finally set limits. They'll twist the story to make it seem like you change, like you abandon them, like you turn cold. Let them say whatever they need to say, because you're not responsible for the narrative they create to protect their ego. You're responsible for your healing. And part of that healing means surrounding yourself with people who remind you what real connection feels like. People who lift you without keeping score. People who listen without waiting for their turn to talk. People who celebrate your wins without envy and sit beside you in silence when you're too tired to speak. It's not just about cutting toxic people out. It's about making space for the right ones to come in. And once they do, once you've had a taste of relationships that don't demand a performance, you'll never settle again. You'll realize that all the times you were told you were too much or too sensitive or too intense, you were just in the wrong rooms. And now you're choosing better because you're allowed to be a lot. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to protect your energy like the sacred thing it is. And you're allowed to choose a life where peace isn't the exception, it's the rule. You can't fix people who benefit from being broken. You can't heal people who refuse to acknowledge their wounds. And you can't grow in a garden full of weeds that choke out your light every time you bloom. But you can remove yourself. You can plant yourself elsewhere, in better soil, under brighter skies, and start again. There's power in the pause, in the quiet decision to no longer tolerate what you used to explain away, in the slow, steady walk out of rooms that made you feel like you had to shrink just to be accepted. And when you walk out, you don't have to slam the door. You don't even have to look back. Just step forward, step free, step into the life you were always meant to live, before they convinced you that survival was the best you could hope for. It wasn't. Peace isn't a luxury, it's a right, and it begins with you. There's something profoundly quiet about the moment you realize that you no longer need to explain your distance. You don't need a speech. You don't need a breakdown of events. You don't owe anyone a detailed report on why you started protecting your peace. Because sometimes the most powerful boundary is the one you never have to announce. It's the shift, the change in how you respond, the lack of engagement, the subtle but unshakable energy that says, "I'm done dancing in your storm." You stop showing up to the chaos. You stop reacting. And in doing so, you take back every piece of yourself you once gave away in the name of loyalty, love, or fear. Toxic people survive off your engagement. They need it like oxygen. Your defense, your outrage, even your silence when it's simmering with unspoken frustration, it all feeds the fire. But when you stop reacting, when you step out of the arena entirely, something powerful happens. They lose their audience. They throw their usual lines, drop their usual provocations, and it falls flat. Like a play performed in an empty theater. No applause, no feedback, just a quiet they don't know how to survive in. I remember a time when someone in my life, let's call them a family member, would bait me constantly. Subtle digs, passive-aggressive comments, the kind of remarks that are said with a smile, but are meant to sting. For years, I took the bait. I'd defend myself, explain my decisions, try to find common ground. Every time I left the conversation feeling worse, like I had just run emotional laps and gotten nowhere. Then something shifted. I stopped responding, not with icy silence or bitterness, but with neutrality. Calm, a smile, and a simple, "You're entitled to your opinion." I'd pivot the conversation, walk away, change the subject. And let me tell you, the power of disengagement is unmatched. They lost interest. The drama couldn't live without my participation. Refusing to engage isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's the realization that you're not obligated to fight every battle just because someone invites you into the ring. You're not required to carry every accusation, to explain every choice, to validate every doubt someone else tries to project onto you. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to preserve your energy. You are allowed to say nothing at all. But that kind of detachment doesn't always come easy, especially when you've been conditioned to believe that silence equals guilt, or that not defending yourself means you've lost. Here's the truth. Silence is not surrender, it's strategy. Because the more you engage, the more you reinforce the dynamic. And the longer you stay in the game, the more you forget that you can simply stop playing. Toxic people will accuse you of being cold, distant, selfish, because they can't control you anymore. Let them. Their opinion of your boundaries is irrelevant. Their discomfort with your peace isn't your problem. You weren't put on this earth to be someone's emotional punching bag. You weren't born to carry someone else's refusal to grow. You're here to evolve, to find your center, and to protect it fiercely. That's where purpose comes in. When you're focused on something greater, when your life has meaning, goals, passion, you naturally begin to filter out what doesn't align. Toxic people struggle to penetrate that kind of clarity because their tactics, distraction, guilt, manipulation require your full attention. And when your attention is rooted in your growth, their chaos starts to fade into background noise. I once worked in a place where drama was currency. Gossip flew around like confetti, petty rivalries, whispered complaints, one-upmanship at every turn. At first, I got pulled in. I'd listen, react, feel the tension, But over time, I realized something. The more I participated, the more I lost focus. My work suffered, my mental state dipped, I felt off-center. So I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to be part of that game anymore. I started showing up differently, head down, purpose locked in. That's not my business became my mantra. My productivity soared, my peace returned, and most of all, the people who thrived on my attention, they stopped trying because I was no longer available for the nonsense. That's what purpose does. It anchors you. It reminds you who you are. And when you're anchored, no amount of noise can pull you off course. That's not to say you won't notice the distractions, but you'll stop entertaining them. So what's your purpose? Maybe it's building a career that excites you. Maybe it's becoming the most authentic version of yourself. Maybe it's healing generational wounds or creating a family dynamic you never had growing up. Whatever it is, hold on to it like your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. When your life has meaning, toxic people lose their grip. Their manipulation starts to look obvious. Their drama starts to feel unnecessary. You realize that your time is a resource, and you'd rather spend it building something than cleaning up after someone else's mess. That's the quiet power of being focused. You don't need to clap back. You don't need to burn bridges. You just stop showing up for battles that aren't yours. You protect your energy like sacred ground. You create distance not out of spite, but out of necessity. And eventually, the people who aren't aligned with your growth start to fall away. Not because you push them out, but because they can't breathe in the atmosphere of your clarity. But be warned, when you start evolving, not everyone will clap for you. Some will feel abandoned. Others will accuse you of being different. And they're right. You are different. That's the point. You're no longer available for dynamics that drain you. You're no longer willing to be the emotional anchor for people who refuse to swim on their own. And that might ruffle feathers, it might change relationships. But what's the alternative? Stay stuck? Stay small? Stay surrounded by noise just to keep the peace? That's not peace. That's performance. So choose yourself. Choose stillness. Choose boundaries. Choose the kind of life where your energy goes toward creation, not recovery. Toward love, not damage control. Toward truth, not twisted conversations that leave you doubting your own worth. And along the way, be mindful of something else, the temptation to gossip. It can be so easy to vent, to share what they did, to unload your frustrations to anyone who will listen. But here's the secret no one talks about. Gossip is just another form of engagement. Even when you think you've walked away, gossip keeps you emotionally tethered to the very person you're trying to distance yourself from. I learned that the hard way. There was someone in my circle, consistently manipulative, always stirring conflict. And at first it felt good to talk about them. It felt validating. But over time I noticed something. Those conversations never left me feeling better. In fact, they left me bitter, drained, and still mentally trapped in their world. That's when I stopped. Not because they didn't deserve to be talked about, but because I deserve peace. And peace means not renting out mental space to people who don't live in your life anymore. You don't need to drag their name through the mud. Just let them sink into silence. The quiet absence of your attention is louder than any insult, and it echoes where it matters most, in your freedom. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't just to get away from toxic people. The goal is to build a life so full, so aligned, so rooted in peace and purpose. You also begin to recognize joy in places you used to overlook. The smell of coffee, the sun through the window, the way your favorite song sounds in the morning, the way a quiet walk feels like a hug from the world. You stop chasing big highs and start appreciating steady peace. You don't need everything to be exciting. You just need it to be real. And with that groundedness comes clarity about your energy. You no longer give it away carelessly. You notice who drains you, who invigorates you, Who makes you question yourself and who reminds you of your truth? You create energetic boundaries that no one can see, but everyone can feel. You become more selective, not out of pride, but out of preservation. Because you've learned, not everyone deserves access to your soul. You even begin to forgive differently, not for their comfort, not because they asked, but because you're ready to stop holding what's heavy. You forgive in silence. You forgive with softness. You forgive not to fix the past, but to free your future. And sometimes the person you forgive most often is yourself, for not knowing, for staying too long, for trying too hard, for bending until you broke. You don't carry shame for that anymore. You carry wisdom, and that wisdom shows up in how you walk through the world. You don't demand attention. You don't force connection. You simply exist in your truth. You speak when it matters. You rest when you're tired. You laugh without performing. You cry without apologizing. You no longer explain your healing. You just live it. And as you live it, something beautiful happens. You become magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because people are drawn to what's real. They feel your calm. They notice your boundaries. They respect your space, the right ones at least, the ones who aren't threatened by your light, the ones who don't flinch when you say no, the ones who see your silence as presence, not absence. And those people, they're your people. You no longer chase connection. You allow it. You no longer tolerate what feels off. You name it. You no longer stay for potential. You choose what's proven. You stop hoping people will grow and start asking, are they growing now? Not in theory, not in words, but in their habits, in their honesty, in how they hold space for you without making it about them. You've learned too much to go back now. You've seen too much, felt too much, grown too much. You know what peace costs, and you're not willing to gamble it. You know what chaos feels like, and you're not willing to wear it as a badge anymore. You've spent too long proving your worth. Now you just embody it. And when they ask what happened to you, why you're quieter now, why you're not as quick to respond, why you're not always available, you just smile. Because the answer isn't simple. It's layered. It's sacred. It's yours. But if you had to explain it, maybe you'd just say this: I stopped betraying myself to be loved. And that changed everything. It's funny how the smallest shift in perspective can feel like a revolution. One day you're sitting there, wondering why nothing feels right, why everything feels heavy, why the people you bend over backwards for never seem to notice, why your effort echoes but never lands. And then it hits you. It's not that you're too much, it's that you've been showing up in places too small. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Spaces where your fullness was never going to be understood because it wasn't meant to be. And when you realize that, something unravels. The pressure to perform, the habit of holding back your truth just to be palatable, the compulsion to keep proving yourself to people who only saw you through the lens of what you could give them. You start asking different questions. Not how can I make them see me, but why was I trying so hard to be seen by someone who refuses to open their eyes? That moment of clarity, though quiet, reshapes everything. You stop walking into rooms wondering if you belong. You walk in knowing you do. And if the room still feels wrong, you don't try to fit. You just leave. Because belonging has never been about being accepted by others. It's about refusing to abandon yourself. You begin to live from that place of wholeness, and it's subtle at first. You say no without guilt. You don't rush to fill silences. You no longer feel the need to explain every boundary. You just hold them, gently, firmly, consistently. And the ones who are meant for you, they feel the safety in that. Because your no isn't rejection, it's clarity. Your distance isn't cold, it's protection for both of you. And there's beauty in that clarity, because you start spending your energy differently. No more proving, no more fixing, no more auditioning for roles in other people's stories. You write your own, and it's quieter than the noise you're used to, but it's also more honest. You sit with your discomfort instead of rushing to numb it. You don't reach for temporary highs just to avoid facing your pain. You let the ache teach you. Let the silence speak. Let the fear unravel itself without you needing to control it. And it's hard, but it's holy, because in that stillness, you find pieces of yourself you didn't know you'd lost. The piece that used to love freely, without hesitation. The piece that trusted its own voice before it was taught to second guess. The piece that knew rest was not laziness, that your softness was not a flaw, that your tears weren't weakness. They were proof that your heart still worked. You welcome those pieces back, not all at once, but with intention. You stop being ashamed of your emotions. You stop apologizing for your needs. You stop hiding your tenderness behind sarcasm or busyness or pretending not to care. You admit that you do care, that you feel deeply, that you love with your whole being. And instead of treating that like a liability, you begin to see it for what it really is, a gift. Because while the world taught you to harden, your softness was always your strength. The way you hold space for others, the way you hear what's not being said, the way you sense when someone's energy is off, even if they haven't spoken. You realize that your empathy isn't weakness, it's intuition, it's wisdom. It's your ability to stay connected to what matters, even when the world tries to distract you. But with that gift comes responsibility. The responsibility to not pour from an empty cup. The responsibility to not sacrifice yourself for people who refuse to do their own work. You learn that you can be kind and have boundaries, that you can be generous without being used, that you can be understanding without becoming someone's emotional dumping ground. You no longer entertain conversations that exhaust your soul. You no longer explain your healing to people who mock the process. You don't argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding you, not because you think you're better, but because you've made peace with not being chosen by everyone. You understand now that not everyone is supposed to stay, that some people are just passing through, carrying lessons in their hands, lessons wrapped in heartbreak, in distance, in unmet expectations. But you're not angry, you thank them. Even the ones who hurt you, because without them, you wouldn't have learned how to protect your energy, how to trust your gut, how to come home to yourself over and over again. You find that home in the most unexpected places, in a cup of coffee on a quiet morning, in music that feels like it was written for your soul, in a moment of breath between thoughts, in the way your body softens when you say, "I'm proud of you," to yourself and mean it. These aren't grand, Instagrammable moments. They're simple, sacred, yours. You start practicing gratitude not as a performance, but as a posture. Not for what you have, but for what you feel. For the way your chest expands when you realize you've survived things that once felt impossible. For the way you now trust the timing of your life. For the way peace finds you, not because everything is perfect, but because you finally stopped fighting yourself. And yes, there are still hard days, still moments where the old version of you wants to come back, to people please, to overthink, to shrink. But now you pause, you breathe, you say, "Not today." We've come too far. And in that pause, you reclaim your power. You remember that your value is not up for negotiation, that your voice is not too loud, that your needs are not too much. You remember that you are not here to earn love. You are love. And the moment you stop proving and start remembering, everything begins to shift. You begin to attract people who match your peace, not your pain. People who don't flinch at your depth, who don't run from your darkness, who meet you where you are without trying to fix or rescue you. They just stay. They show up. And when they say they care, you believe them, not because you need to, but because they've shown you you can. But before you find those people, you have to be willing to walk alone, to walk through the desert of your own becoming, to release the version of you who needed chaos to feel alive, to say goodbye to everything that no longer resonates. That path is quiet, but it's worth it. It's your real life. The one where you're not just surviving, not just performing, not just existing for others' comfort, but living fully, authentically, unapologetically. And once you taste that, you never go back. You start to see yourself differently once the noise quiets down. Not just because you've created more silence around you, but because you finally learned to listen to the part of yourself that doesn't scream. The part that whispers gently in between moments. The part that knows who you are underneath the expectations, the habits,